Heard overnight that those being held by Hamas in Gaza for the past 7 weeks, basically everybody's on tenterhooks because Hamas has said it would release some captives under an exchange agreement with Israel. But Israel now says that that's not going to happen today. It will be tomorrow at the very earliest.
It's not clear what exactly has caused that delay. 50 captives are to be freed from Gaza in exchange for 150 imprisoned Palestinian women and minors, as well as a pause in the fighting and desperately needed humanitarian aid, fuel and medical supplies. Well, former head of the British Army, Lord Dannatt, joins us now. Good morning, Lord Dannatt.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. You might not know the exact answer, but what usually would delay the hostage release process like this? Do you think it's something that has happened on Israel's side, Hamas, or a combination of both?
Well, I think, to be fair, there's not a usually about this. We're in pretty uncharted waters as far as this is concerned. It would appear that there is some technical breakdown or something is not quite in place, which has caused this 24-hour delay. But I'm afraid this is going to be the characteristic of the next few days. There's going to be uncertainty, there's going to be expectation, there'll be hope stashed. This is going to be a real psychological roller coaster for the families of Israeli hostages. So I think we just have to watch this space and just watch to see what happens.
In terms of the military angle, Lord Dannatt, and great to have you on as the former head of the British Army. Obviously, we've seen the hostilities. Everybody has an opinion. We've talked about tunnels. You know, there's one side saying, you know, these are not a military thing, say Hamas. The IDF will say, yes, it is. The hostages are stuck in the middle. From a military point of view, if and when this temporary, well, I was told it's a ceasefire, I don't know. By the way, let me ask you that. Is it a ceasefire or a cessation of hostilities, a 4-day pause? What is it, Lord Dannatt?
It's a pause. I think we can call it a humanitarian pause, but it's certainly not a ceasefire. A ceasefire would be something that both sides would agree to. It would be a semi-permanent arrangement, an agreement to actually stop fighting. This is not a ceasefire. This is a pause for humanitarian reasons to get a small number of hostages out, a much larger number of Palestinian prisoners released, and critically, probably up to 300 trucks a day of humanitarian aid getting into Gaza. That's what it is. It's a pause. It's definitely not a ceasefire.
Would it be fair to call it a temporary ceasefire, Lord Dannatt? I know we're talking about semantics here, but
I think we are talking semantics. Let's call this a pause. When it happens, and let's face it, it's not happened yet. But when it happens, we will start to see this slow trickle of hostages released and a much larger number of Palestinians exchanged. But critically, there will be some aid coming in. But of course, this is effectively a sticking plaster over a major crisis. Fundamentally, the objectives of the two sides are in complete contradiction. Hamas wants to eradicate Israel from the face of the map, and Israel wants to destroy Hamas completely. With those two strategic objectives totally contradictory, I'm afraid what's going on at the present moment are short-term measures to try and ease, from the Israeli government's point of view, some of the pressure from the families of hostages to get some of their loved ones home. That's really all it is at the present moment.
I think that's true. I think maybe, and we talked about this earlier, and I'd love your opinion on this. I think America is playing a part in this. I think there is pressure internationally, led, of course, by Israel's major ally, the United States of America, because the optics are appalling. I also thought overnight, and I don't know if this is relevant at all, I mean, one wonders and one hopes this isn't the case, but, you know, somebody said yesterday on some news station, well, Israel are getting 50 hostages and Palestine are getting 150. And then suddenly Netanyahu came out and said, this is temporary, and then the war restarts. And so all of this bubbles on. The poor hostages are stuck in the middle, taken from their homes. And essentially, from a military point of view, it will be the military who has to carry this out. Huge responsibility on both sides.
You're absolutely right. It's going to be a very difficult set of circumstances on the ground. But meanwhile, I mean, there's a better part of 10,000 Israeli soldiers in northern Gaza. That's 4 fighting divisions. They're going to carry on their operations just as soon as they're allowed to. But I think, just going back to your earlier point about your comment about the United States, there is a much bigger picture at play here. And that is, people are trying to think in strategic terms. What is the future for Gaza? What is the future for the Palestinian people? And there are a lot of discussions going on behind closed doors between the United States, Saudi Arabia in particular, trying to figure out what is the best way to get a long-term solution in Gaza and Palestine. And that's the big picture that's playing out at the present time. On the ground, it's this ugly war is going to continue. We're going to see this psychological roller coaster I mentioned before of a few hostages out, a few prisoners exchanged, a few trucks in. That's just what's going on the ground. But the big picture is people trying to figure out across that region, what is the way to stabilize the region? What is the way to stabilize the future of Israel? And what's the way to find a solution for the people of Palestine? That's the big question. Those are the big issues.
I couldn't put it better myself. We've heard for years, Nick, haven't we, about a two-state solution. And it is somebody said earlier, it's not about what's after. Of course it's what's after, because it patently didn't work before, which is why we're in the position we are. Lord Dannatt, always a pleasure. I know we've had to flip-flop around worse than Keir Starmer used to this morning. But Lord Dannatt, thank you very much indeed.